Behold.
So sweet, yeah, I need it from you. Got my hands all on you, sweet. Everything I wanted. Sugar like yes, please. Love is like candy. Sweet, yeah, I need it from you. Got my hands all on you, sweet. Everything I wanted. Sugar like
Hey guys, welcome to The 101. I'm your host, Ben Meredith, cinematographer and filmmaker based out of Los Angeles, California. And I'm super excited to finally drop the first episode and lesson of Cinematography 101, the course where we're going to start ground up and take you through every step of cinematography so that hopefully by the end you can go out and make films of your own, get clients, and be a professional cinematographer. It's great to see some familiar faces. Thank you guys for joining me. Jim, I see you over there. Oh, Jim. Logan, thank you for showing up. Devin. Brittany, nice of you to come. Jesse, they let you out? I'm not sure. Jesse, oh my God, last time I saw you, we were being chased by alligators on that random boat that we stole, and we crashed into Sam Worthington's house, and he just kept talking about Terminator Salvation, and then like Steph got her leg bit off, which was like kind of funny but sort of serious, and then Sam Worthington still kept talking about Terminator Salvation. It was like, we get it, you're Sam Worthington, and Terminator's really cool. We understand Sam Worthington, but stop talking about it. Sorry. Okay, so let's jump into it. Today's episode is on camera fundamentals, how your camera and lens captures light, and the settings that you need to know to get a quote-unquote cinematic image. Cinematic image. Cinematic. The image. Now, as we go on, you'll learn there's not really a right or wrong way to do things, but for the 101, I'm mostly going to be speaking on the general settings that a cinematic image has. In 134 and later down in other episodes, we'll learn how to kind of manipulate those, but for now we're going to just stick to basics. All right, let's get into it. If you already own a camera, I suggest you take it out and kind of follow along with the lesson as we go. If you don't own a camera, that's fine. Just, take notes, and I will, at the end of this video, give my suggestions on good entry-level cameras that will last you literally a lifetime. All right, so your camera has different parts. It has the body, it has the sensor, it has the lens. It kind of works very similarly to our eye and our brain and the way that we perceive images, which is kind of the beautiful thing about creating your voice and your vision through a camera. It has a lens with an iris, which is kind of like our eye, and light reflects off of things and goes into that lens and projects onto a sensor, which is kind of like our brain, and that sensor interprets what we're seeing, which is kind of what we do up here. But don't quote me on that. I hope there's no doctors watching this show because I'm going to look stupid. But yeah, it's kind of similar. So let's go through the ways in which a camera captures light, starting with ISO. ISO comes from ASA, which was film stock ratings, kind of how sensitive it was to light. I'm not going to go too far into that because I just want to avoid information you don't need to know, but if you want to learn more about it, I'm sure there's other YouTube videos on that. So essentially, ISO is kind of a digital gain of your sensor capturing light. I would think of it like a speaker. So when you're listening to music, your speaker generally has kind of a sweet spot where you hear the bass and the mids and the highs, and it sounds really nice. What happens when you turn that speaker too far up? Well, it gets noisier and louder until it's and it just sounds like shit. Similar to how ISO works, and yes, there are dual native ISOs. Don't worry about that yet. We will get into that in 134 on Friday. For now, we're just going to talk about your ISO setting. So ISO is something you generally don't want to touch too much if you don't know enough about it. Most camera manufacturers have a native ISO, and what native ISO means is their own personal, or as a business, rating of that camera's ISO where they think it performs the best with dynamic range to the noise floor. What the did I just say? Okay, let's break some of that down. Dynamic range is basically the darkest of darks and the brightest of brights in your image. It's the amount and the range of light that your camera sees. Noise floor is sort of where does your camera start to get noisy? And noisy can be a lot of different things. It depends on your camera. It could be kind of fine grained sprinkled throughout, or it could be blocky pixels and colored pixels that are just... So your camera's native ISO is where it performs best with all of those things considered. These days, generally, that's around 800. So that's a good rule of thumb to keep kind of no matter what camera you're using. If you're set at ISO 800, you're probably in a pretty safe zone. If you want less light to come in, you can lower that 400, 200, 100. And if you want your image to be brighter, you can raise it. But again, think about it like the volume knob on a speaker. The more you turn it up, the noisier and muffled it's going to get. This is something you need to test with your camera specifically. Some can go up to 12,000 and be relatively clean, but others can only go up to 1600 or 3200 and the image starts to break apart and look pretty terrible. So that's basically ISO. It's a digital boost or gain, lowering or highering of your actual sensor. That being said, it's something you don't want to touch too much as a beginner. So for now, let's just say lock it in at 800 or maybe 400 and just kind of leave it there. Let's learn with that. As we go on, we will talk about shifting your ISO in the camera for certain reasons, but right now, let's kind of stick to these basics. That's ISO. So next we're going to talk about frame rate. This one's pretty simple for this lesson. Keep your frame rate at 24 frames per second. Especially if you're in America, that's just the standard frame rate for a cinematic image in filmmaking. You might see on your camera 23.98 or 23.976. This is for kind of like broadcast reasons that I'm not going to get into. There's other YouTube videos on that. But that suffices for 24 frames per second as well. If you're outside of America, it might be 25. If you're shooting a reality television show or certain types of content, it might be 30 frames per second. You'll kind of learn all of that as we go along here, but right now we're still kind of focused on a cinematic image and cinematography and filmmaking. So that's frame rate, 24 frames per second. Don't worry, in 134 later this week, we'll get into how to do slow motion and all of that, but for right now, 24 frames per second, easy peasy.
Dummy.
We went so long without you.
I was watching Anchorman.
Yeah. So that's frame rate. Let's get into shutter speed or shutter angle, depending on the camera you're using. Now, don't confuse that. They are the same thing. Cameras just have different settings. So if you're working on more of a cinema camera, it will say shutter angle. If you're working with a DSLR, like a mirrorless camera, it most likely will be shutter speed. So we'll go through both right now. Let's get it out of the way. If you're at shutter angle, 180 degrees, 180. That's the standard setting for, again, a cinematic filmic image. 180 degrees. Just leave it there. Don't worry. In 134 later this week, we'll talk about what changing it does. For now, if you're learning, I would just bake that in at 180 and go from there. Okay, shutter speed, which a lot of you probably have, is always going to be double your frame rate. Okay, so your frame rate times 2. Wait, not 4. Wait, now I look like a tourist. So if you're filming at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed will be 48. And yes, it probably will be displayed 1 over, so 1 over 48. It might be 1 over 50, that's fine too. It's close enough. If you were shooting at 24 frames per second and your camera was 1 over 50 shutter speed, and anyone knew that difference, they'd be lying to you. Double your frame rate. So lock your shutter speed in at that and keep it in. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Like, a lot of these settings seem to be baked in and locked in. A lot of the time they are. That's kind of the trick of cinematography, and that's why lighting is so important, and we're going to get into that in the next curriculum week. But the next one is certainly the one you're probably most interested in. It actually has to do with your lens. Aperture is the way that your lens manually takes in light. As you can see here, there are little blades inside your lens called the iris, And those blades open and close when you raise or lower your aperture. When you close the blades down, less light gets through. When you open them up, more light gets through. And what does that mean? That's right, TikTokers. Portrait mode. This is how you get that blurry background. And I know you guys love that blurry background. I know that you do. I know it. Because everyone does. That helps create, sometimes, a cinematic or filmic image. So I'm not going to confuse you guys too much. Let's just know this simple rule for now. On the lens or in your camera, you might see what f-stop it's reading at. So f and then followed by a number. f2.8, f5.6, f8.0. Don't worry about that yet. We will get into that in the lighting week, but that's how we measure light in cinematography, by f-stops or t-stops. Okay, so don't worry about that too much yet. Just know the lower the number, the more light you're letting into the camera. The higher the number, the less light you're letting into the camera. The result when you do those things, you are either making the focal plane more shallow or more deep. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look. When the f-stop is higher and you're letting less light in, you're deepening the focal plane, which essentially just means more things will be in focus. When you lower the number, you are making the focal plane more shallow, which means it's more specific and less things will be in focus except for the particular thing that you are focusing on, like our beautiful model here. So that's how you get that blurry background. The lower the number, the blurrier the background. There's obviously a little more to it than that, but for now, that's what you guys should kind of know. And that's it. That's how cameras take in light. Every camera, from the DSLR that you might have in your hands right now, to the Alexa or the Sony Venice or Reds. That is how they all take in light. So you might be outside trying all these things in a sunlit environment that you can't control. So you might be thinking, okay, Ben said ISO 800 or maybe 400 for a little less light to come in. Okay, my ISO is at 400, my frame rate's at 24 frames per second, my shutter speed is at 1/48, and I really wanted to focus on this nice flower, and I wanted everything else to blur out in the background. So my aperture is at 2.8, and it's just white. The screen is white. I don't understand. How do I can't control the sun. Should I just give up? I can't just shoot white images. I guess I should sell my camera, and then maybe I guess I could go back to my 9 to 5, and then it's not really a 9 to 5. You kind of wake up at 7, and then you might not get home until 7:30. Then I guess there's time for a quick bite, but you also kind of want to work out, and you're not sure. The next thing you know, you're just in bed again, and you wake up, and you do the same thing. It's cyclical, existential.
Stop.
Not that I would know. Sorry. Don't worry, it's fine. That's what tomorrow is for. We're going to talk about neutral density filters, which is basically sunglasses for your camera lens. Okay, so let's not overdo it. Let's stop there. Get used to those settings. Tune in tomorrow to learn about neutral density and white balance, because that's an important part of your camera setting as well. And that's all we're going to focus on for now. We'll get into lighting in our next curriculum week, but let's really learn how to use your camera and how all those settings matter into creating your image. I know here's the part some of you are waiting for. Yes, we will talk about gear sometimes on this channel. So if you don't own a camera yet, the camera I suggest that you get is the Fujifilm X-T3. Or if you want to spend a little bit more, the X-T4. Why is this? It's a great camera that essentially shoots with a super 35mm sensor. You can get a package used for about $1,000, and for what it does, that is just a phenomenal price. It shoots a log image, and we'll get into that later, but essentially you have a pretty wide range of your brightest brights to your darkest darks. It has a phenomenal image. I've shot many things with it. I've cut it with Alexa, I've cut it with Red, and almost no one can tell the difference. It has a wide range of lenses you can adapt to it. It shoots 4K, so you're good with it for a long time. It also shoots phenomenal stills. And the main reason I recommend this camera is because it will last you a lifetime. Even if you move on to high-end cinematography on big jobs, you can still use this camera to take photos or mount in odd places because it's so small. It could be a crash cam. It's just something that's kind of future-proof. It'll last you a really long time. Whew, okay, we did it. Our first episode of Cinematography 101 is on the books. Thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you tune in tomorrow, and I hope you tune in Friday to 1:34, and we'll dig into this stuff even more. So make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this video so you can stay updated on all the content we're going to come out with in the following months. Again, this channel is really community focused, so the more you guys are involved, the better it's going to be. All right, so go out, test those settings, go shoot stuff, and thank you for stopping by the 101.
So sweet, yeah, I need it